So let's talk about how we can mitigate VLAN hopping attacks in a network with Cisco switches. So just to introduce you to the network, I've got two switches here. I've got a DHCP server set up over here. And then I have a couple of PCs here. Now, this switch, and we're going to do most of our videos here on how to protect your network from layer 2 issues in this network, or layer 2 attacks in this network, and we're going to do it using, do most of our configurations on this switch. So, we've got F01, F02 connected to PCs on the switch. G01 is our trunk line to this switch, and here's our DHCP server off of our second switch. Now, to this point, I have configured VLANs, and that's about it. So let's actually take a look here at the switch, and we'll make this a little bit bigger, make it easier to see. So I'm going to do show VLAN brief, and you'll see that we have an office VLAN, a black hole VLAN, a management VLAN, and a native VLAN. Now, when you're trying to protect against VLAN attacks, one of the things you want to do is make sure that you don't use your default VLAN. So you want to move everything out of there if at all possible. And then having a black hole VLAN where you can bury things actually becomes really useful. So here's what we would do. To protect against VLAN hopping attacks, we're going to start by configuring all of our ports that are going to be outward facing ports, so everything except my trunk lines. We're going to manually configure them as access ports, and I'm going to disable DTP because I don't want somebody to be able to plug into one of those ports and take advantage of DTP. So I'm going to go to config T, and I'm going to do interface range F01 through 24. I'm just going to grab all of them at one time. I'm going to do switch port mode access. That's going to make them all access ports. And then I want to do switch port no negotiate, and that will turn off DTP on all of them. Now, for the ones that aren't being used, which is going to be ports 3 through 24, because remember I'm using F01, F02 here. So I'm going to do interface range F03 through 24, and I want to black hole those. So it's switch port access VLAN, and my black hole VLAN was VLAN 20. It can be any VLAN you want. That's just the one that I chose for my VLAN 20. So now if somebody plugs into one of those switches or one of those ports, they're going to end up in a VLAN that is separated from everything else. And it's going to be a VLAN that's isolated from everything else. I'm not going to put any routing information for that VLAN because I don't want anything to get out of there. I want it black holed. And then by disabling DTP, I've also made it so that somebody can't plug up and connect to one of those ports and take advantage of the DTP protocol to try to figure out what I've got for VLANs by emulating another trunk line. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and shut down all of those unused ports. So I'm just going to issue the command shut, and that's going to shut them all down. And what that does is that means if you plug up to that, now you have a shutdown port. If somebody accidentally forgets to shut down the port, it's still in a black hole VLAN. Now for my other ports, interface range F01 through 2, these are going to be part of my office network. So it's switch port access VLAN 10, and that's going to put them in VLAN 10. Okay, now for my trunk lines, I want to do something similar. So first off, G02 I'm not using. So I'm going to do interface G02, and because this one isn't being used, I'm going to go ahead and isolate it. Switch port mode access, switch port no negotiate, disable DTP, switch port access VLAN 20, and shut it down. Now G01 is going to be my trunk line. So interface G01, and just like I manually put everything else in access mode and disable DTP, I'm going to do the same thing here, but I'm going to put it in trunk mode. So it's switch port mode trunk, switch port no negotiate. Now the other thing is it's going to default to using VLAN 1, its default VLAN, as its native VLAN. I don't want that. I want one to not be used at all. So I'm going to go switch port, trunk, native, VLAN. I'm going to set it to VLAN 40, which, do show VLAN brief and make sure I remember the right ones. VLAN 40 is my native VLAN. So now you'll see in our office VLAN, we have F01, F02. In my black hole VLAN, I have everything else. Now the other thing I'm going to do, and I'm not doing this here, but if I was doing a full network, I would have a router set up or a layer 3 switch or something to do inter VLAN routing, and I would create a default gateway on that routing device for devices that are in my VLAN 10, for devices that are in VLAN 30, and maybe even devices that are in VLAN 40. And you jumped on me there. Let me highlight it this way. But for the VLAN 20, I'm not going to put any default gateway there. I'm not going to assign IP addresses. I'm not going to have anything there for that VLAN 20. I want that to really be a black hole. Now you'll notice we're starting to get errors about native VLAN mismatch. So let's go here to S2 and let's fix that. So for S2, I'm going to go to config T first. Whoops, privilege exec mode first. There we go. Now we'll go to config T, interface G01, which is my trunk line, switch port mode, trunk, and again I want to disable DTP, switch port, no negotiate, and I want to set the native VLAN, switch port, trunk, native, VLAN 40. And yeah, it threw in that error message right in the middle of what I was typing. It doesn't really matter. It won't hurt anything. You actually can get rid of that by in global config using the logging synchronous command. Okay, so at this point, I have everything configured to help protect against VLAN hopping attacks. So my network now is protected against that. And remember, we shut down unused ports. We put all unused ports in a black hole VLAN. We disabled DTP. All of our trunk lines we disabled DTP on, manually made them trunks. And that should provide a good degree of protection for us against the possibility of VLAN hopping attacks.